Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures, and today we're doing part 197 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people are making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So yeah, we're inching there a little bit closer to 100, 200 I mean, so we're nearly getting there. We're getting some pretty big milestones, actually pretty close to each other with, Jurassic World Evolution 2 getting nearly 100 mods and 100 mod spotlights, and this game Planet Zoo's reaching 200. So yeah, thank you all for being around for all of those videos. Really awesome to have you guys around for that. But today we've got some very interesting animals. We've got a lot of fishes from a new modder today. We've also got a couple birds, and we've got a couple. We've got an extinct mammal, and then we've also got something really cool that I've wanted to talk about for a while. It's kind of been making the rounds. In terms of, because it's a genetically edited animal, but I'm actually really excited to get stuck into this one because I want to give my own thoughts and stuff like that as well, and I don't really often get that chance to discuss things like that here, rather than just parroting facts. I get to discuss, moral implications and things like that, but anyway, we're going to save that for when I get to that animal. But anyway, we get to have a look at a new modder who is called J Aquatics, spelled with an IX. And we have got here the orange shoulder tang, another really cool species, or orange band surgeonfish. So these guys are a species of marine ravenfish from the family Anchotheridae, and they belong in the family that includes sturgeonfish, unicornfish, and tangs. So these guys live in the tropical waters of the Indo-West Pacific. So this animal was initially first formally described in 1801 by naturalist Marcus Isaiah Bolk and Johann Golob Thayer Schneider, with its type locality given to Tahiti in the Society Islands. And the species is closely related to the Marquesian surgeonfish, and together these taxa form a species complex within the genus Anchotherus, and is one of two genera within this tribe, and one of the three tribes of the subfamily Ephigonae, which is quite cool as well. So in terms of their description, luckily you're sitting actually quite pretty and standing there for us. So the orange-band sturgeonfish is a very oval-shaped, deep-bodied, laterally compressed fish. You can see it's a very tall fish, very round and oval in shape, and is about twice as long as it is deep, with a maximum length of about 35 centimeters or about 14 inches, though more commonly is about 10 inches or about 25 centimeters. So both the dorsal and anal fins are low and long, which extending as far as the caudal peduncle, so about up there. The dorsal fin itself has 9 spines and 23 to 25 soft rays, while the anal fin has 3 spines at about 22 to 24 soft rays. The tail fin you can see is quite a crescent shape going on there, with the points getting longer as the fish ages. The adult fish you can see are greyish brown, with a sharp vertical line usually separating the pale front half of the animal from the darker back half, so you can see that's quite interesting. They have a distinctive orange bar where they get the name from, so you can see they've got this orange bar there with also like a purple outline to it, like a purplish black margin, and it's immediately by the gill cover, behind the gill cover, and that's where it kind of gets its name. And like all sturgeonfish, they do have a pair of scalpel-like scales that protrude upward from the caudal peduncle, and larger males actually have a convex snout, which clearly differentiates from the female, and the babies actually tend to just be yellow, which is quite interesting as well. We'll have a look at someone else as that's moving a little bit more, since he's just kind of sitting there a bit. We'll have a look at someone swimming around just to give you a bit more activity, because why not? So in terms of its distribution habitat, so these guys are found in the tropical eastern Indian Ocean and the western Pacific Ocean. Its range extends from Christmas Island, so the Cocos-Keeling Islands, to southern Japan, western, northern and eastern Australia, Indonesia, the Philippines and Hawaii. So it's associated with reefs, and it's often found on the outer slopes and in more exposed locations. And as an adult, it is a solitary fish, but sometimes will join schools, and with a depth range about 9 to 46 meters, or 30 to 150 feet. But juveniles are typically found in shallow waters, in sheltered areas, in small groups. So these guys are quite interesting. The orange-band sturgeonfish, like other sturgeonfish, typically feeds on detritus and other types of algae growing on the seabed, as well as the films of diatoms and filamentous algae that grow on sand and other surfaces. And they often form schools with parrotfish, tang, and other species of surgeonfish, which all have similar diets. And this grazing is actually quite important for maintaining the biodiversity of reef ecosystems, as they keep rocks free from excessive algae growth, which allows coral larvae to find suitable habitats to cling onto and start growing. So these guys, it's very important for their ecosystem. And they also can change their color from dark to pale quite quickly, sometimes instantaneously, almost. But in terms of their status, they're luckily doing well. They have a wide distribution in the tropical Indo-Pacific region, and it's moderately common. It is sometimes found in fish markets or in the aquarium trade, but it's not a specifically target species like the blue tang or anything like that. And no particular threats have been recognized, so the IUCN has listed it as least concern. So that's quite good, always good. So you can have a look at that tang going over swim there by Jaquatics. The other next two species are also done by Mr. Jaquatics. We have also got here the clown tang. No funny business with this one, of course. So this is in the same genus, but it's also known as the Lyne's surgeonfish, the blue-banded surgeonfish, or the pajama tang. So there's a couple of other names it's known by, but there's quite a few others. It is a same group and family as the orange shoulder tang, and this species is also found in the Indo-Pacific. So this species was first formally described as Chenaleton lanatus by Linnaeus in 1758 in the 10th edition of Systematica Naturae, and it's given its location or its type locality being the Indies. And the genus itself, as we mentioned, one of two genera, we already mentioned that before. And the scientific name, Lanatus, refers to the lines, as reference to the yellow and black lines going down their body. So kind of, where that gets that name. So this species actually gets to a pretty decent size. So this species reaches about 38 centimeters in length, and much of the body has black-edged blue and yellow stripes, and the top of the head is striped with yellow. The belly is greyish, and the pectoral fins have darkened rays, and the pelvic fins are yellow-brown with black margins. So you can kind of see that there. Probably not the best example there, but you can kind of see it. Individuals around the Philippines, though, they can actually vary quite a bit in coloration. And like other surgeonfish, they possess a sharp spine at either side of the tail base, but unlike other surgeonfish, these guys are actually venomous and can inflict quite painful wounds onto handlers, if you don't handle them correctly. So in terms of its distribution, the species is found in the Indian Ocean from East Africa to the Western Pacific. It can be found in the Great Barrier Reef, Japan, Hawaii, all those guys. We'll move over here because you don't want to see you not swimming. So as I mentioned, they are found quite around the place, around East Africa, all those places, up to Hawaii and Polynesia, so quite an open species. The Lyne surgeonfish is associated with reefs, living in marine waters, typically just a few meters deep, and is considered bethnopelagic, so it likes living at the bottom of open water. So bethno kind of means bottom, and pelagic means open, so basically bottom open, pretty much. In terms of its behavior, these fish are territorial, with a large male defending a feeding territory and also a harem of females. The adults may also school, but they gather en masse during spawning. The juvenile is solitary, with the fish being mostly herbivorous, but they might eat crustaceans at times, with most of its diet being algae, and it grazes during the day. These species, when they're found in Australia, in the Indian Ocean, have a greater defense rate against intruders. Lyne surgeonfish in the Indian Ocean have a smaller body size, allowing them to have greater access to food, and due to hurricane damage on reefs, that actually enhances the algae reef turnover, typically, which was quite interesting. I don't know what you disappeared into the thing there. We'll see what else. I'm going to have a look at you. Yeah, that's what I want to look at. Camera. There we are. So that's cool. And in terms of its human uses, it is a commercial and ornamental fish. So people, fish it for money and also, ornamentals, so they keep in aquariums. It is especially important among the reef fish of American Samoa, and in some areas it is quite heavily exploited, but luckily it lives in many protected areas and is widespread and common, so it is considered least concern, so that is quite good. Another good least concern species. That's not what we, don't want to worry about them guys going extinct. But yeah, that was another one by Jaquatics. Next up, we have got the Achilles tang, so another similar species, also known by Jaquatics. And I see you floating there, but we will not use you, I guess. Oh no, we'll use another one. There's probably another one around here. Here we are. So this is Joquodyx's Achilles tang. So the Achilles tang, or the red-tailed sturgeonfish, or red spot sturgeonfish, these guys mentioned, same family and group as the other two tangs before. So this species, Anchithurus achilles, was first formally described in 1803 by English biologist George Shaw, but Shaw did not give a type locality or a type specimen. In terms of its etymology, the scientific name Achilles comes from, we don't know where it comes from because Shaw did not actually explain where it came from, but I thought it might be referencing the name Achilles of the mythical hero of Greek, Trojan War, and maybe an allusion to the sharp bony plates on the caudal peduncle that a lot of sturgeonfish have, which is interesting as well. Let's actually zoom in a little bit to get a good look at you. Let's see, you're going to swim onto land, are you? But I don't want to let you really sit and have a mosey on there. In terms of description, you can see it's got a very elongated, oval-shaped body with a steep dorsal profile on its head. It has a small protuberant mouth. Oh, don't worry about that one. I think it's looking for food there. Down here, we'll have a look at you. Anyway, there's a small protuberant mouth, as you can kind of see there, and it has between 8 to 28 teeth fixed on each jaw, each flat with a flattened serrated tip. And the dorsal fin is supported by 9 spines and between 29 to 32 soft rays, while the anal fin has 3 spines with 26 to 29 soft rays. There's a single mobile spine on each side of the caudal peduncle, which folds down into a slit, and the caudal fin is also concave. The overall colour you can see is a bluish grey, which is quite well shown here, with an irregular oval orange patch or blotch on the rear of the body, a white bar over the gill covers, a wide open bar, white bar on the fin there, and also like a black one as well, as you can see going there. There is a pale blue ring inside, just inside the snout tip as well. And these guys get to a decent size. They can get to about 24 centimeters, or about 9 inches long. So a bit smaller than the other tangs, but they are still quite cool. In terms of their habitat, they are found in various reefs in Oceania, up into Hawaii and Pitcairn. They're also less commonly found in the Marina Islands, and even found some in some places like Guatemala and Mexico, southern Mexico. And they are a bethnopelagic species again, so they like to live in clear waters on the seaward sides of reefs. And they are herbivorous, so they're grazing largely on benthic algae, and are monogamous and quite territorial too, so that kind of gives you a little bit about their ecology. Not too different from other tangs, but yeah, another really cool species. So the 3 species done by J Aquatics, very 3 species of tang, very, very cool. And it seems like today we've got quite a few Great Cakes mods as well. So we've got a couple birds now that we're looking at. So next up we have got the Venusian hornbill. So let's have a look at these guys. Let's have a look at you. Let's see if we can find one. I don't want to look at that. There's a female. We'll have a look at her. So this is the Venusian hornbill. Pedipalps panayi. So these guys are a hornbill found in the moist tropical lowland forests of the Philippines and the western Vietnamese region, which includes the Panay Negros and formerly the islands of Masabe and formerly Ticao. In the Philippines, is this where they're found? And in this case, of all the 5 species of hornbills, of the Ptolemy hornbills, just considered one species, so they were kind of all considered one and then split off in different species. And they sadly are considered endangered, but we'll get into that. So these adults show some quite stark sexual dimorphism. So you can see this is a female here. So we'll have a look at the male first. So there's a male over here, I think. That's an adult, yes, that's an adult male. So you can see the male has a creamy white head and neck, a white upper chest, and reddish brown lower chest and upper tail coverts, and also a creamy white buff tail and a broad black tip to his bill. The bill and casque are blackish, with the former with yellowish ridges on it, and the bare oculus is pinkish. And the tail of the female resembles that of the male, the tail and the bill, but is otherwise completely black. So other than all this creamy white bit, the female is pretty similar. So you can actually see a pretty good comparison there. And in terms of, they do live in groups, and they are frequent the canopy of rainforests. And these birds are considered quite noisy, and they create quite noisy sounds. And despite being quite noisy, though, they can be quite hard to find in the foliage because they're quite well camouflaged. So they were first discovered by French polymath George Lucas Leo Kometsev in 1780, which is quite cool. And they were originally in the same genus as most other hornbills, so they were put in their own genus. So the origin of the generic name comes from almost or nearly. So the name means Penelophus, which means almost crest, or nearly crest. And Penini comes from Latinized form of Panay, which is the island where they come from, for the most part. Formerly, there was one species with the Luzon hornbill, the Sambar hornbill, the Merida hornbill, and the Merida hornbill. So there's kind of a few different species that were all considered one, but then were split into 5. Don't know what's going on with you there. I think they might be sorting something out. Must be hungry. Don't know what's going on. What's going on with these guys? Anyway, we'll carry on. Let's have a look at you over here. It's a baby. No, it's a baby. We don't look at a baby. Is an adult. Alright, so in terms of the ecology and behavior, they are primarily frugivores and eating figs and berries, but they're also known to eat insects, lizards, and other small animals. But they're usually seen in breeding pairs, but they can live in groups of up to about 15 birds. So in terms of their breeding, they are all monogamous and they mate for life, and they are cavity nesters and typically rely on large dioicocarp trees for breeding. So what happens is that they'll find a nice big hole in that tree and they'll sit in it. So the female will seal herself within a tree cavity and then put the male in charge of gathering food for her and the chicks. And the male will store food in his gular pouch and regurgitate it to feed his mate and the chicks. And cooperative breeding has also been seen. So when immature birds from previous seasons help out in feeding the female and chick has not been observed in the species so far. But this has been seen in its relative, the rufous hornbill, which we kind of talked about a few weeks ago. So we'll have a look at the cute little babies as we get a chance. We like talking about the cute little babies. Where'd you go? They're kind of locked in animations a bit. That's alright, so here's a juvenile. So lays eggs in March to April. And clutch size is typically about 2 or 3 eggs. They're not studied on incubation periods, but based on Luzon hornbills, it takes about 28 to 31 days for them to hatch, about a month. And they fledge within 55 to 58 days of hatching. So that's kind of typically where you kind of get them. So I don't know why they're stuck like this. But I know they do this sometimes when you reload a map, but that's okay. We'll have a look at this female, but we'll talk about their conservation. So they are considered a highly endangered species, and the IUCN thinks there's less than 1,200 remaining in the wild, which is pretty tragic, I think. Let's have a look at you since you're flying. That's cool. Juvenile. Very, very cool. Anyway, the species' main threat, though, is habitat loss, with wholesale clearance of forest habitat that results as a result of logging, agricultural conversion, and mining activities, which is good in quite a large part of their range. And Negros Island is actually one of the most deforested areas in the country, and it actually only has about 3 to 6% of their forest cover than what they did. However, there is conflicting data, with some have counted potentially up to 4,000 hornbills on the island of Negros, but there's more studies needs to verify this claim, so they're a bit worried, you might overcount. But the subspecies Ticonensis, which is the now believed to be now extinct subspecies, was abundant in 1905, but pretty much the entire island was replaced by plantations and settlements in the 20th century. And the last time it was seen was 1971, and is believed to be extinct. But luckily, the species itself was fine, and they do live in a few protected areas. Though the protection and enforcement of this is quite lax. So hopefully they do better enforce all these, rules and things like that to help protect them. But they are very hard to find the pure ones in captivity, because since they were all considered one species and how there's 5 different species within these groups, so it's hard to find pure ones. But there are a few places, such as Chester Zoo has a couple pairs, and Avifauna in Netherlands has a couple pairs, and also Los Angeles have had them as well. So, but there has been the Taranak Foundation based on Negros that actually bred multiple purebreds ones that have been managed to hopefully release them into the wild. So I don't know what's up with these guys being so static at the moment, but that's kind of how it is sometimes. But anyway, we're going to carry on. So next up, we have got another Great Cakes mod. We have got the red kite. You know, how can you not love a red kite? So we'll have a look at you. You seem to be doing fine in terms of flying around and everything, which is good. So the red kite, or Mulvus mulvus, is a bird of prey in the family Antipidae, which includes many other raptors, including eagles, buzzards, and harriers. They breed only in Europe, but they formerly also bred in Western Asia and Northwest Africa. Historically, they only resident in the milder ranges, parts of the range in West Pacific and Northwestern Africa, where there's most red kites, and most northern mainland areas wintered in the south and west, and sometimes reaching Western Asia. But an increasing number of birds now remain in the region year-round, and vagrants have been found as north as Finland and south as Israel, Libya, and Gambia. So the red kite was described by Carl Linnaeus back in 1758, and literally it was originally Falco mulvus, but the word mulvus literally means bird. So if you think gorilla, 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 this scientific name for the red kite is literally bird. So it's a bird. So I think that's quite funny. And there's two different subspecies. There's the mulvus, which is this one here, and there's actually a Cape Verde subspecies, which is believed to be almost certainly extinct. So these guys do also, the genus Mulvus contains the black kite and the yellow-billed kite, and they have been known to hybridize with the black kite in captivity and in the wild on Cape Verde. But the red kites on Cape Verde are actually very interesting in terms of their morphology, being somewhat intermediate. And the question is whether consider they were either distinct species or red kite subspecies not been settled. And a mitochondrial DNA study suggests that the Cape Verde did not actually consist of monophyletic lineage, and they could have just been results of hybridization. So really, it's kind of hard to decide where that happens. But sadly, this population has been effectively extinct since 2000, as all the birds living today are hybrids of red black kites as well. It's a little bit sad. So in terms of their size, red kites are about 60 to 70 centimeters, or about 24 to 28 inches long, with about 175 to 195 centimeter, or 69 to 77 inch wingspan. Males weigh between 800 to 1200 grams, or between 28 to 42 ounces, and females weigh between 1000 and 1300 grams, or between 35 to 46 ounces. They are quite an elegant looking bird, as you can see, soaring on long wings, held by at a dihedral, with long forked tail, twisting as it changes direction. And you can see the body as well, and the upper tail and wing coverts are kind of a rufous or red color, where it gets the name red kite. And the white primary feathers contrast the black tips and dark secondaries, so that's quite interesting as well. Apart from the weight difference, the sexes are quite similar, but juveniles do have a buff breast and belly, and it's caused quite a thin pipping sound, similar to but the less mealing than the common buzzard. And there's actually a rare leucistic morph that you can get that's approximately 1% of hatchlings, but they have issues surviving. And you can see that's actually the baby right next to us, so you can compare the adult and baby feathers, literally right there. And that'll actually help us because we're going to start talking about their breeding, because that's another important part of their ecology, Don't worry you saying in a pipe. We want to have a look at you, mate. That's not even the one we wanted, of course. There we are. There he is. So in terms of breeding, usually red kites first breed when they're about 2 years old, even though, although exception they can breed within being about a year old in exceptional circumstances. They are monogamous, and they pair bond in resident populations is probably maintained during the winter, particularly when the pair remains on the breeding territory, though for migratory populations, the fidelity of a particular nest site means the pair bond is likely to be renewed each breeding season. They nest is normally placed in the fork of a large hardwood tree at a height between 12 to 15 meters, 39 to 49 feet. And the pair will sometimes use a nest from a previous year and can actually occasionally occupy the old nest of a common buzzard. And the nests are built by both sexes, with the male bringing dead twigs between 30 to 50 centimeters or 12 to 20 inches of length, which is placed by the female. And this can be lined with grass and also sometimes with sheep's wool. And using a black kite, unlike the black kite, no greenery is added to the nest. And both sexes continue to add material throughout the incubation period and nesting periods. And nests actually vary greatly in size and can become large when the same nest is actually used quite a lot in different seasons. So in terms of their eggs, they are laid in 3-day intervals. The clutch is usually between 1 to 3 eggs, but 4 or even 5 have been recorded occasionally. The eggs are non-glossy with a white ground and red-brown spots, with the average size being about 57 to 45 millimeters, or between 2.2 inches to 1.8 inches, kind of in length and width, and a calculated weight of about 63 grams or 2.2 ounces. In Britain and Central Europe, laying begins at the end of March, but in the Mediterranean, it can actually lay begins in early March. The eggs are mainly incubated by the female, but the male will relieve her for short periods of time while she goes off to feed. The male will also bring food to the female, and incubation starts as soon as the first egg is laid, with each egg hatching about 31 to 32 days, but they all hatch asynchronously from a clutch of 3 eggs requiring 38 days of incubation. The chicks are cared for by both parents. The female will brood them for the first 14 days while the male brings food to the nest, which the female feeds the chicks with. Later, both parents will then give items of food which are placed in the nest to allow the chicks to feed themselves. And the nestlings begin climbing onto branches around the nest for about 45 days, but really fledge between 45 to 50 days, and sometimes not until they are 60 to 70 days old. The young will then spend a further 15 to 20 days in the neighbourhood in the nest, being fed by the parents, but only a single brood can be raised each year. But if the eggs are lost, they can easily replace them as they need to. Let's have a look at you flying over there, because let's have a look at the food and feeding now. So the maximum age recorded for a one is about 25 years and 8 months for a ring bird in Germany. And the longevity record is also 25 years and 8 months for a bird that died in 2018. And in 2023, one of the first red kites reintroduced into the UK was actually found injured in Oxfordshire and actually died in age 29. So they do live quite a decent, lifespan, these guys do. In terms of feeding, these guys are typically generalist scavengers and predators. The diet consists mainly of carrion of the large domestic animals such as sheep, pig, roadkill, and stranded fish. They also will take small mammals such as mice, voles, shrews, stoats, young hares, and rabbits. Also, live birds will be taken, such as young and wounded ones as well, such as crows, doves, starlings, thrushes, larks, gulls, and waterfowl. And occasionally they even eat reptiles and amphibians and take invertebrates such as earthworms, which can actually be quite an important part of their diet, especially in spring. In some parts of the UK, they've also actually been deliberately fed on domestic gardens, resulting in the presence of expanding in urban areas. And up to 5% of households actually provide supplementary feeding for red kites, with chicken being the most often supplementary feed there. As scavengers, though, they are particularly susceptible to poison, so illegal poisoning baits set for foxes or crows are indiscriminate and will kill all animals, including kites, as well, and they have been targeted by wildlife crimes, trying to get them and sell them and things like that. And they have been reported actually taking food from humans, and they swoop down and steal sandwiches from people in one of the town's parks. So you've got to be very careful if you're around those areas. In terms of habitats, though, red kites typically inhabit broadleaf woodland pastures, mixed farmland, valleys, and wetland edges, up to about 1,600 metres in elevation. They are native to the western Palearctic, where there's believed to be about 32 to 37,000 breeding pairs being in Europe. And they also used to be breeding in Western Asia, around northern Iran, Syria, and Turkey, and in northwestern Africa, around Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia. But most of these populations sadly extirpated in the 19th century or earlier. And the only non-European breeding population is in Morocco, with the last pair dying in 2004. Today it breeds from Portugal to Spain, the central part of eastern Russia, north and southern Scandinavia, Latvia, and the United Kingdom. But most red kites in the northern Europe mainland will actually come down south of the winter, and they'll even come down to Africa, but they don't breed in Africa and Western Asia anymore. So they will go down there, but it's quite sad. Though Germany has quite a big population, it's home to about half of the world's breeding pairs. In areas they have declined a lot, but luckily due to conservation, they have been increasing due to good conservation efforts and reintroductions. Particularly in the UK, there have been quite a few introductions of red kites. The main threats to these guys are poisoning through illegal direct poisoning or indirect poisoning from pesticides, particularly in their wintering ranges, and changes of agricultural practices as well. Other threats include electrocution, hunting and trapping, deforestation, egg collecting, and competition from the generally more successful black kite as well. So there's some things that happens there. But yeah, there's been lots of reintroductions as well. And they were extinct in Ireland as well, but they agreed to bring birds as well, so they have kind of a lot of reintroduction efforts have happened to help the species and have been done quite well, which is always quite cool. But yeah, another really cool species. So we'll just escape out of there. Nice Great Cakes mod, another great one there. But we got another Great Cakes mod. We always do love to talk about Great Cakes, apparently. So we're going all the way back to the Mesozoic. We've got a really cool species here. We've got Adalatherium. So let's have a look at this cool species. Adalatherium hui. So Adalatherium is an extinct Gondwanatherian mammal that lived in the Moenivo Formation, also from the Majunga province, known from Madagascar, about 70 to 66 million years ago. So lived right at the end of the Cretaceous. So this guy would have lived with things like Majungasaurus and Rapatosaurus and all those really cool dinosaurs that were probably covered in other videos, especially in Jurassic World Evolution. So these guys would have been scurrying around with them, which is also quite cool. So one of the really interesting things about this guy as well is how huge it is for a Mesozoic mammal. So most Mesozoic mammals were very small, not very much like shrew or mouse size, but these guys, compared to them, was enormous. It's like, comparing, it would be like having a rhino. This is like the Mesozoic equivalent of a rhino in terms of Mesozoic mammals, just because it was a very large animal for the time. It was the fourth largest of them all, so about 5 kilos or about 11 pounds. Kind of is the largest estimates, and it's actually thought to be a result of potentially island gigantism, because Madagascar was still an island at the time. It's thought to only be exceeded by, so it's thought to be about as big as a badger or a cat, but there are other species like its contemporary Britannia, which was a little bit bigger, Rapatomimus, which was an extinct mammal that actually a globodontid, which actually lived in the Ixian Formation in China. That was quite a big predator. We'd also pick it Patagonia minor, which was a possible Gondwanatherian, which is quite interesting. So that's another potential relative of this guy. So there was potentially lots of big mammals down south during the Maastrichtian. So let's talk about some of the interesting aspects of this guy. The front of its skull is the second discovered head of any Gondwanatherian mammal, the first being Ventana, and has more foramina or openings in the skull than any other mammal except it's the Argentinian Cladotherian Velestalis. But overall, it's quite famous for being the most complete skeleton of a Gondwanian Mesozoic mammaliform currently found, and it includes the only postcranial material and ascending ramus, or part of the mandible, of the dentary known from any Gondwanatherian. So this shows how much we don't know about these Gondwanathers, and this actually shows how much we can learn just from one species. It's a great species to talk about as well. So similar to today's rodents as well, Adalatherium was equipped with continuously growing front teeth, a case of convergent evolution with today's rodents. So their teeth were constantly growing, and that suggests they were using a lot of wear and tear on their teeth. Its rear teeth were unique compared to those of other mammals, with each one having a diamond-shaped ridge running along the outside, interlocking with the opposite tooth in the other jaw. And this quite unusual dentition indicates that it was a herbivore, and it was usually unusually bow-leg bones, strong back muscles, and enlarged claws suggest this would have lived very much like a badger, and been very much a fossorial or burrowing animal, using its claws and on its robust arms to dig through burrows and things like that, or uncover roots and seeds to feed on them as well. So as mentioned, it lived in the Moenivo Formation in Maastrichtian age, or right at the end of the Cretaceous period, in Moenivo Formation in Madagascar, and it was found to live in an alluvial plain where there was lots of rivers and floodplains and stuff like that, but it did have a relatively dry climate, about semi-arid, and which is quite interesting as well. And we believe it may have gone extinct because of the extinction that killed all the dinosaurs, the big Chicxulub impact, but there's no way to tell. Could have got extinct before then, but we don't know. So animals that would have been contemporary with, a lot of really cool animals. And what's cool about the Minerva Formation as well is some of the really interesting animals that it lived with that are not dinosaurs. But dinosaurs that would have lived with, things like Machikosaurus and Majungasaurus, from Jurassic World Evolution. Also Rapetosaurus, so large carnivores and herbivores living there as well. Also some small things that lived with was Beelzebufo, which was a large frog as well. Potentially could have eaten young Dilithium. Cymosuchus, which was a crocodilian that lived in that formation as well as a herbivore, so it was like a dog-sized little herbivore. It also lived with a lot of other large mammals as well. And Dilithium, I guess, kind of means crazy beast for Malagasy. So Adala means crazy in the Malagasy language, so it definitely is a crazy beast, Very funky looking, very different from pretty much most mammals we think about today, and, lived under the foot of dinosaurs. And in terms of its habits as well, there's a lot of debate on how these guys would have actually kind of bred. Because it's kind of, these Gondwanatheres would have been in a weird kind of transitionally, they would have potentially not been that closely related to, so they would have been Therians, so they would have been related to placental mammals, but we don't know if they were laying eggs or potentially had pouches and things like that. Most recent evidence suggests that they would have been more similar to placental mammals, having a placenta and raising their babies inside their body. But, there could be some kind of partway point they may have had that. And it wasn't until recently where we kind of looked into that and figured that out. But the hypothesis of them potentially laying eggs like monotremes, like Echidus and Platypus, or potentially even, having a pouch like marsupials, they're both equally likely, but most evidence at the moment, whatever little evidence we have, does suggest that they were giving birth to live young, which we don't know. So we don't know if they laid eggs. So they could have laid eggs. But there's a study that looked in multituberculates. It's just they didn't lay eggs. But also they're not closely related to multituberculates. So that's kind of we really don't know. We don't know how to exactly divide that. But quite cool. Really cool animal. Really, really cool to see. So that is a Dilithium. Another really cool Mesozoic mammal. I always love talking about Mesozoic mammals. I think Mesozoic mammals are incredibly underrated. Just because they're so cool. If I was ever to really study paleontology, I think I would love to study either Mesozoic mammals, the Ediacaran Cambrian faunas, or potentially sauropods. And I just like, or maybe Entelodons or something like that. I like studying funky things that no one wants to study. I like the things that everyone's kind of curious about and, learn those things. But yeah, really, really cool. Another cool species by Great Cakes Mod, always a winner. We do love a Great Cakes. So, next up, last but certainly not least, we have got by Pork 13. We have got the colossal dire wolf, quote unquote, as I'll get into. So, I actually went through and kind of named them these different names. So we've got Ramus, and yes, I did forget to put the drinks in again because I am silly. Let me just put that in for them. I know they'll be thirsty as. That's a bit sad. But we'll let them all have a drink, of course. And have a little stretch. How cute is that? So I'll let you sit there. Okay, so we have 3 individuals from this genetically modified little population going on. We have got Romulus, Ramus, and Khaleesi, who are genetically modified grey wolves that were created by Colossal Bioscience, which is a company, trying to resurrect the mammoth and the Tasmanian tiger and the dodo and all them. But the goal was trying to replicate the phenotype, or how the animal that looks like an extinct dire wolf, which they spectacularly failed at, but I'll get into that. So looking at the genetics of how they did this, so the creation of these modified grey wolves involved analysing ancient DNA that came from 2 sources, a 13,000-year-old tooth that came from Sheridan Cave in Ohio, and a 72,000-year-old ear bone that came from American Falls in Idaho. And Colossal Biosciences scientists stated that they did not insert the ancient DNA into the grey wolf genome. In fact, they looked for the differences within the 2 genomes and just activated the genes within the genomes in the grey wolf. So they just turned on those genes, or expressed those genes. They didn't directly put the genome of the dire wolf into the genome of these modified grey wolves. So there's no cloning or anything. There's no actual direwolf DNA in these guys. And they found there was only about 20 different modifications, genetic modifications, about between 14 genes that differentiated direwolves and grey wolves. And the teams used epithelial progenitor cells, or EPCs, from grey wolf samples, and used CRISPR gene editing to produce the several traits that they wanted to create, that the company was claimed that was found in direwolves, such as pale colour, large body size, and wider head. And only about 15 of these 20 changes are directly based on the giant direwolf genome, and the remaining 5 changes were known to produce a light coat colour. So light coat colour was actually created by inducing a loss of function in the genes NC1R and MFSD12. And these modified nuclei, once they, modified the genome, they put the nuclei in the denuclease ova, which was, developed into embryos, and then these embryos are put into a surrogate mother dog. And then these dogs, the surrogate mothers were selected domestic dog mixed breed that were quite healthy and, big enough to birth the pups. And one particular surrogate mother was a dog named Skylar, played a crucial role in the project. And these pregnancies were monitored using weekly ultrasounds, and all 3 births were given through C-section to minimize complications. And the mother's dogs, after cesareans, were cared by the university team, the surgical team, and reunited with their puppies, which is quite cute. But we're going to talk about these individuals themselves. I think this is Ramus. Is he the big one? Because I know we've got a big one here. That might be this one. There he is. Have a look at Romulus, Really, really beautiful animal. So, born in October 1st, 2024, Romulus and Ramus are housed in a secured 2,000 acre, or about 810 hectare, ecological preserve within the US, surrounded by a 10-foot tall fence in an undisclosed location. And the facility has a smaller 6-acre area with a vet clinic and extreme weather shelter and natural dens, and they're actually watched all the time by decision and vet, so they make sure they're all right. So these guys got their names. Romulus and Remus were named after the legendary twin brothers who founded Rome, and in Roman mythology had been suckled by a she-wolf as infants. And as pups, they did do a little bit of a marketing shoot. They put them on the Iron Throne, to give it the dire wolves from Game of Thrones. And I'll get into why Game of Thrones is really bad for this initiation they're doing. So in terms of their diet consists of beef, deer, and horse meat, supplemented with organ meat and special nutritionalized supplements. They were fed pureed meat after weaning, but now receive whole portions, and they're also being engaged in natural tearing behavior. The wolves are now not being provided with live prey, though they have not observed any interactions with small wildlife that may be in the enclosure. The different genetic modifications that we can see in these wolves is quite interesting. So they have several key physical differences from grey wolves. That includes a pale coat and distinctive vocalization, particularly bearing unique howling patterns. Morphologically, they have a larger overall body size with a more powerful shoulder structure, a wider head shape, larger teeth and jaws, and more muscular legs. Behaviorally, they exist the natural wolf behaviors of being early howling, which usually begins at 2 weeks of age, stalking and hunting behaviors, and a natural wariness of humans, which is good. But unlike domesticated canines, they maintain distance for people, including their handlers, and display characteristic wolf retreat behaviors when approached. So based on unreviewed genetic research, they claimed that the direwolf had a pale coat coloration, which we'll get into that. I don't think that's true. The pup's white coat is actually a result of a coat coloration gene expressed in dogs, chosen as a replicant for the proposed original gene, which carries a risk of blindness and deafness. And by 6 months of age, the male wolf was measured about 4 feet long, about 122 centimeters in length, and weighed approximately 36.3 kilograms or 80 pounds each, but they are projected to reach about 6 feet, about 183 centimeters, and about 68 kilograms and about 150 pounds in mid-full maturity. So they're definitely up there with some of the largest wolves recorded, so they're definitely very big. And they do have a sister. So their sister, Khaleesi, was born on January 30th, 2025, and she was named after Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones, and the 3 wolves are now maintained in a small pack. And I'll get into a little bit of the ethics and the reception and add my own thoughts. So independent experts completely disagree with the claims that they resurrected the direwolf, and they shouldn't have done that from the start. It looks nice on covers, having them on the throne. Oh my god, Game of Thrones, and oh my god, media and stuff like that. But really, they just slightly changed to Grey Wolf, and it took them a while to admit that, but they did admit that, so that's good. Zoologists Philip Shedden and paleontologist Dr. Nick Rowlands actually explained these actually are genetically modified hybrid grey wolves. They're not even hybrids because there's no DNA from direwolves in them. They're just genetically modified grey wolves, and that's the end of that. And they also noted that ancient direwolf DNA is extremely fragmentary, so you can't create a clone. And most science actually suggests that direwolves separated from grey wolves potentially between 2.5 to 6 million years ago. So they seem to be actually more closely related to jackals than they are to modern direwolves. So modern direwolves are more closely related to jackals than grey wolves. So that's what I meant to say. And it's Kristen, luckily there's only small differences between the gene, and they're suggesting a closer relation to the greater wolf genetically by the company's marking. So they actually said, no, actually that's not true. They're actually more closely related to grey wolves. That seems to be like an internal logic, and that was not good for them. So you can see here, this is what actually a direwolf probably would have looked like. This is a mod I've covered ages ago by Gaboy and Genora Pizza. So this is likely what a direwolf would actually look like in life. We'll have a look at you because you haven't got any things on here. But yeah, this is what likely a direwolf would have looked like in life. Much different from a modern grey wolf, and a lot of the adaptations they had was convergent for killing large prey rather than actually because they're that closely related to each other. So they actually were not very similar at all in a lot of regards, and a lot of reconstructions. Luckily, these days, now knowing that they're more closely related jackals, have been reconstructing them very visually different from these type of wolves, which is good. So the geneticist Adam Boyko in Cornell University stated that these wolves are only a functional version of direwolves. So they look like a direwolf, but they're not actually direwolves. They don't even look like direwolves, to be honest, as well. And they're not a direwolf under any definition at all. They're just a genetically modified grey wolf, which is true. However, that was disputed by Beth Shapiro, who from Colossal Sciences argued that hundreds of thousands of genetic differences exist between direwolves and grey wolves. And he also questions whether this proposed direwolf had any place in the modern world or merely just becomes zoo animals, which is also true. That might be a bit of a worry. But according to Times Magazine, a lot of nations have actually expressed interest in potentially releasing these modified wolves on reservations, which is interesting. I don't know why they would do that at all, but that's okay. But author J.R.R. Martin, who wrote the creative Game of Thrones, was invited to see the wolves, and he commented, maybe I was remembering a past life when I ran with the pack in the Ice Age. Whatever the reason, I have to say the rebirth of the direwolf has struck me as no scientific news as since Neil Armstrong had walked the moon. But I don't think many agree with that. George R. R. Martin not being a scientist. And they're howling, you're being a bit loud, mate. We'll move over to one of these guys, since they're the highlight. We'll have a look at you because you're actually over there and I don't want to... You're a bit loud. Anyway... But the IUCN, who's kind of the final say on a lot of these things, have actually, the Canid Specialist Group, officially declared that these animals are neither direwolves nor proxies for direwolves, and by the IUCN. SSC Species Survival Plan, SSC Guiding Principles for creating proxies for extinct species for conservation benefit. They commented that creating phenotypic proxies doesn't change the conservation status of an extinct species and may instead actually threaten extant species. So potentially these guys get out into the wild and breed with wild wolves, and wild wolves get bigger and they'll get rid of a lot of the traits. You're basically polluting the wild genome potentially. And these guys will not fill the role of direwolves. They're nothing like direwolves, as I've mentioned before. But therefore, creating these claim proxies do not conform with theirs, and they have no niche left today and do not restore function. So basically, I will say, in my personal opinion, after saying that, I do quite like the idea of all this, potentially. It's a great way to learn about how genes work and how CRISPR and stuff like that. We're able to really manipulate these genes and really try and get the traits that we want. But I think to claim that this was nothing more than a marketing stunt because, this looks like a direwolf out of Game of Thrones, and we all know Game of Thrones is not necessarily the most scientifically accurate thing out there, because there's giants and dragons and things like that. It's a fantasy genre, hence it's not realistic, and it was a marketing ploy, because we create something that looks like a direwolf, and, they have George R. R. Martin coming in and saying all these things about it, who's not a scientist. really it was just a marketing ploy to get money and talk about, oh, we're restoring direwolves and things like that. But if you actually know any paleontologists or people that have worked with the genome, if you look at the genome, they look nothing like direwolves at all. Direwolves, as you showed before, they would look very different, and it would be like saying I created a human, and there's basically the same difference between a human and a chimpanzee genetically is from a direwolf and a grey wolf. So you basically, there's no real big relation there. So I think it was very silly how they kind of went about it, claiming the direwolf is, resurrected, because they're not. They're just genetically modified grey wolves. They're designer wolves to make looks like something from Game of Thrones. That's really what it is at the end of the day. So they're just designer wolves. They're not dire wolves. They're designer wolves. I think that's what we should be calling them. Designer wolves. I like that, actually. But yeah, it's still cool for science, that we can edit these genes so closely and pick the traits that we want. And there's obviously some potential talk. I know Colossal is a very controversial company and done a lot of things that are not actually really helpful for conservation. But there is, these kind of techniques could be used to help conserve species in the future. But these kind of claims are just erroneous, and they're not dire wolves, they're designer wolves. And they was used as a marketing ploy to get money by a company, and it worked. Colossal has got a lot of funding, and whether that's a good or bad thing, it's how you interpret the company. I'm not particularly a big fan of the company, but you can't get mad if someone's actually genuinely trying to resurrect a mammoth or something like that, because it's a potentially cool thing. But it's just a tech bro thing. It's a tech bro company trying to do conservation, and it's not really working out because in terms of their philosophies, they're very different from each other. So I don't see how that's working. That's not really gelling very well. But time will tell. Eventually they can potentially help with conservation. They did talk about doing stuff with red wolves, like cloning red wolves and cloning coyotes that have a lot of red wolf traits, but actually did not have red wolf traits. There's actually a video. I forgot the guy. I might have to put in the link in the description, but I might not. I'll just see. But they talked about it a lot. Yeah, those kind of things is just erroneous claims and things like that. It's just part and parcel for Colossal at the moment, and it's really sad because I'd like to be supporting a company like that, but I just can't in good conscience when they're claiming they brought back dire wolves when they really just made designer wolves to look like Game of Thrones, because people love Game of Thrones because fantasy, And I'm not a personally big fan of the fantasy genre. I'm not a big fan of Game of Thrones, and I just think that was real. And I think the real life dire wolf, like this guy here, you can see, like these dire wolves, like this girl, are much more interesting than anything that comes out of Game of Thrones, in my opinion. You watch them play. But yes, I think this is a great place to end the video. So, thank you everyone for making these awesome mods. Thank you, Jay Quadix. Nice to see you making into the scene. Thank you, Great Cakes. Thank you, Pork. And thank you, Good Boy and General Pizza, for a scientifically accurate or plausible dire wolf. So, yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Hope you see you guys real soon. And if you want to follow me, click the bell icon to get notified about anything. So, if you guys enjoy this video, if you guys like and subscribe, and bye bye.